Are you ready for the Thursday edition of Club Corbie? We're here. It's sunny Thursday afternoon. It's sunny now. The sun's come out. It was a bit grey earlier on. And if you've never watched the stream before, we do this, I would like to say, every weekday. Most weekdays we do this. I think that's a fair assessment. For about an hour every afternoon, I live stream the making of the comic Corinne Morgan Corbie, and just show you how it's all done usually within Clip Studio Paint. And speaking of which, let's bring up the software right now. So this is page 23, and it's largely completed now. You'll notice there's no text in there because I've still got to add the speech bubbles and a little bit more detailing on the blackbird that's behind Corinne there. So I still have the mock-up bubbles in place, so you kind of get an idea of what it's going to look like once the final page is done. We're going to do that on a future stream. We're going to letter that page and the page that we're about to start now back to back, because that seemed to work pretty well before, and it takes us about an hour to letter two of these pages, so it makes for good stream content. Otherwise we would letter it and then we'd be left with nothing to do for the second half hour. So that is ahead of us. We're gonna switch those speech bubbles off. By the way, I'm very pleased with how Sadie turned out in that third panel. I think that's the best one of the best illustrations of Sadie that I've ever done. So Kevin on the last one I'm not so sure about, but it's a very awkward positioning there, so they can't all be winners. Anyway, I could still come back and tweak that, but today we're going to get started on page 24, and you can see, as usual, I've got the storyboard versions of the characters I've very hastily placed there, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over it and a bit like we always do, and do the actual character art for everybody. I lost my place now. I'm just going to go dig up my model sheets. I always have to do that. I should really keep this files open before the stream starts. Okay. We're going to turn down the opacity on the grid layer, and also on the storyboard layer as well. So we're just going to begin. I will say that although things have been slow, and you know I'm continually frustrated at the time it takes me to finish any given page, or any given set of pages. It does feel like we're kind of starting to settle into a routine now. And I mean that in a good way. Where in the initial stages of doing this ongoing comic strip version of Corbie, as opposed to the comic book version, but this is page 24 that we're working on now, and you know, the first 10 pages in particular were really a learning process, and it was about figuring out what the best way was to do it. And we started off doing everything by hand and then going in and cleaning it up, and that was really time consuming and didn't really work. And then we transitioned over to working entirely within Clip Studio Paint with pages 10 through 20, I think it was, or thereabouts, and there was still a lot of refinement of the process that needed to go on at that stage as well, because the first couple of pages that we did very heavily needed to you know, adding a lot of shading and a lot of decorative elements. And what you might have noticed is the most recent batch of pages that we've done really don't have those elements. I'm not going in and rendering, you know, Kieran's hair and adding light and shadow to every part of it. In fact, we're really not doing an awful lot of shading at all. And that is just, you know, a concession that we've had to make in order to speed up the process a little bit at least. And you know, you'll hear me talk a lot about we don't have the luxury of time, and also that it doesn't make a lot of sense to agonize over every little tiny detail, because ultimately, because of the nature of social media and the way that people see things in their feeds, whether that's Twitter, Instagram, or wherever, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to agonize over something that people are going to look at for a second and then they'll scroll up and it's gone forever as far as they're concerned. And so we need to produce art in an efficient manner as possible. We try to make each panel very clean, very striking and very effective. So sort of the formula has become about, there's a heavy emphasis on the characters. You know, we spend about 90% of the time that I'm spending actually illustrating any given page is is actually illustrating the characters, and then the backgrounds are done in a very minimalist way. There's just minor details to keep us as readers rooted in where the characters are, unless it's like an establishing scene or something. In that case, it'll get a bit more attention. But from panel to panel, typically it's about just watching the characters interact, especially in these scenes, like in school. In this particular scene that we're going through just now, this is about Corinne and Sadie interacting, as Corinne has returned from her adventures in issue 4 of the comic book. And now nervously has to make up a bunch of excuses as to where she's been, and not let the cat out of the bag, or the crow out of the bag, so to speak, as to the fact that she's Corbie. But anyway, but a scene like this, where the characters are it's mostly just characters talking. I don't know how we're gonna handle the process once we get into more of these superhero elements of Corbie, the actual action scenes and things like that, how that's going to translate to this sort of format, because it seems to work quite well for if you have just characters going back and forth and talking. Obviously, if you look at most sort of newspaper comic strips, that's typically what they are. It's just 3 or 4 panels of characters having back and forth dialogue, and there's a gag of some sort. And it's definitely possible to do superhero stories in this format, because one of the big influences for me on this project and taking Corbie in this direction was the Spider-Man daily comic strips. But we're a long way away from that anyway, from having to have Corinne suit up and become Corbie and these pages. It's one of the frustrating things, by the way, for me, being the writer of Corbie and the artist as well, is that as a writer I have tons of ideas for things that I want to do, and as an artist I'm so slow, and so I'm kind of moving at a glacial pace here, and I just want to be able to tell these stories, and I never really get to. It's just we've kind of crawled our way through it over the years. I certainly didn't think when I started to work on actually making Corbie happen, that was like 4 years ago. It was literally right as the last US election was happening. It was about the time that I realised I really needed to get this going. And then it took 2 years to get the first issue out of the, well, I guess at the time we thought it was going to be an ongoing comic series, and it kind of was, but it was more like a mini series of 4 issues. And of course now I've sort of switched over to this new format, and we're continuing to tell the story. It continues to unfold, just it's going to be in a different manner. We've basically taken almost a year off to well, it's going to have been a year off, I think, before we get new content out. I think that the idea is that once content resumes, we're going to have a big enough buffer that once we're rolling, we can just keep rolling indefinitely, and I shouldn't need to take any long hiatus, because I'll always be working behind the scenes on the next batch of issues, or batch of pages, I should say. And that hopefully everybody who, the tiny number of people who've actually read all 4 issues of the existing comic will still be on board by then, or will come back on board and will read the new stories, and also that we can open this up to new readers as well, who maybe wouldn't be incentivized to go to some website they don't know and download a PDF of the comic or whatever. They're not going to do that, because people are mostly stuck on their social media platforms now, and are less inclined to go hunting around the web for content. And it's certainly something where in the very early days of Corbie, I was very adamant about the fact that I wanted each issue of the comic to be like a document. I wanted it to be, even if it was digital, that it should feel like an actual full-length comic book. And I would rather people had been reading it that way, rather than just a series of unconnected JPEG files, if you see what I mean. It's that it was a publication that you read from end to end. But again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier on about having to make concessions, and I just don't think that is viable Especially in terms of building an audience in 2020. I'm always conscious of the fact that I don't really have a built-in readership as such, so I have that much more to prove. It's not like Corbie is an existing IP that's known to most people, so the onus is kind of on me to put the content in front of people and to convince them. I think I'm gonna erase the tie here and redo it. Maybe that's too big. Okay, I don't know why the shirt tails are that small. why they're positioned like that. I'm quite happy at this point to really lean into the storyboard sketches if the positioning of the characters and the proportions and everything are all fairly correct, then it really just becomes a case of refining it. And very often what you'll find is that really quick initial sort of scribbled version of the art that you make is going to be the one that has the most energy to it. And if you try to replicate that, then you find whatever you are agonizing over, the version of the art that's going to be much more refined is going to lose a lot of that spark, if you know what I mean. Again, it's one of those themes that I come back to a lot in these live streams. I'll talk about it, but ideally I'm trying to always keep that spark and keep that energy if it's there in the storyboard version of the art. If I can maintain that, working within the confines of the characters, making sure everything is right, then certainly that's what I'm going to try and do. I think we need to keep in mind as well, always, that speech bubbles have to go over everything. So those are the mock-up speech bubbles. That's obviously not the final one, but those are just to give us some idea of the placement and how big we can expect that they're going to be and where they're going to go on the page. So knowing that kind of gives me an idea of which areas to prioritize. So I know that I could spend ages agonizing over these little details down here. Not that there's very much to agonize over, because it's all just basic elements of the character design, but there's not going to be much point because it's all going to get blocked off. And I didn't simplify the eye details if it's a really zoomed out shot, and add them in obviously more if it's like a close-up. So I think in this case we'll just keep it fairly simple there. There we go. Just added a little bit more detail to the hair there. Yeah, you know what? I think that's going to do it. I think we should move on and get started on Sadie. Okay, let's round out that jawline just a bit more. Oh, I just realised something. I forgot to add in Coon's hair there. There we go. That was a quick fix, but it's mostly going to be obscured by the tie there. So okay. Okay, I'm gonna have another go at this tie as well. Same issue, I think it's Corinne's. It's like I feel like the ties are just expanding over time. They're sort of becoming more exaggerated in terms of size. And if nothing else, I need to make sure they're at least centered correctly. Now, having said that, I think the shoulder's actually going to come up and obscure this part of the tie. Okay, definitely room for a couple more little details here and there, just to get everything just right. And ultimately, again, we've got to remember a lot of this art is going to get obscured anyway, so there's no point in agonising over it too much. The goal, as we were talking about earlier, is to do everything as efficiently as possible, get that art on the page, and then, you know, move right along and do panels 2 and 3 and 4. And then when we're done, we're going to do a lettering stream, and we're going to do this and the previous page, page 23, back to back. So I don't know when that's going to be. It might be tomorrow. More likely, it'll be Monday. But that is going to be a story for another time, as I often say. And that is going to do it for today's Club Corbie. As you can see, we've covered a bit of ground, so I think we're off to a good start with this page. And the plan, subject to change, is that we will return for another stream tomorrow at should be about the same time, I would imagine, about 3 PM UK time. So I hope to see you then for the next edition of Club Corbie.